Okay, so good afternoon, all of the participants, ladies and gentlemen. So firstly, I would like to introduce myself. So I am Peodesia. I'm one of the staff at UIB International Relations Office. And I would like to thank all of you to participate in this joint seminar. So to all the participants, for the presenters, for UIB students and also UEL students, please open your camera and please put the virtual background. Also, I would like to inform that in the Zoom meeting, so we also invited some of our lecturers and also UEL lectures, and also the participants of international trade law online courses. And for the audience who would like to watch the presentation, so because of the capacity, so we invite them to watch the presentations in YouTube, live YouTube of UIB. Okay. And I would like to greet the invited lecturers. The first one is Dr. Phuc from UEL Vietnam. Good afternoon, Dr. Phuc.
Good afternoon.
Okay, hello. Nice. Hello, nice to meet you. And also I would like to greet Mr. Tin from the External Relation Office of University of Economics and Law, Vietnam. Hello, Mr. Tin.
Yeah, good afternoon, Ms. Theodosia, and good afternoon, everyone.
Okay, good afternoon. Thank you. And also I would like to greet the Dean of Law Faculty of Universitas Internasional Batam, Dr. Lu Sudirman. Selamat siang, Pak. Good afternoon. Okay. And also I would like to greet Dr. Rina S. Yarula, PhD. Good afternoon. Okay. Okay. So, and also I would like to greet all of the presenters today. Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Okay, so are you ready with your presentations today?
Good afternoon, Miss.
Yes or no?
Yes, we are.
Yes. Okay. Okay, thank you. And also, sorry, I forgot to mention one more lecturers. Hello, Pak David. Good afternoon. Okay. Okay, so so I will be the MC for this joint seminar. So welcome everyone to the International Joint Seminar on Comparative Law. This is a collaboration between UIB and University of Economics and Law Vietnam. So there are some agendas of today's seminar. So the first one is the opening, and after that will be the opening remarks from Dean of Law Faculty of UIB, Dr. Lu Sudirman. And also after that, it will be followed by the explanation of the program by me as the staff of the International Relations Office of UIB. And also after that, we will listen to the presentations from 9 groups. One group consisting of 1 student from UEL and 1 student from UIB. And after that, I would like to invite the lecturers, both from UEL and UIB, to give comments and feedbacks, suggestions for the students to better their articles or presentations. And after that, I would like to invite all participants to give testimony about the program. And after that, we will have we have to close the seminar. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Lu Sudirman as the Dean of Law Faculty of UIB to give opening remarks to Pak Lu. Time is yours.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let's be grateful that God Almighty have blessed us with healthy and opportunity to attend this event. International Trade Law online course is a credit program that is conducted between UIB and University of Economic and Law, Vietnam. This program is the first program collaborated with UEL Vietnam, such UIB and UEL started collaboration in October 2020. This program started in June 7, 2020, and today is the last day for the program week. The students are going to present their research articles as the output of the program. And behalf on the Faculty of Law, University International Batam, would like to deliver my sincere gratitude to all parties that involved in this event. All the lecture, Mr. Da Gi Pung, PhD from UEL Vietnam, Ms. Hu Kim Han Dong, PhD for UEL Vietnam, Ms. Rina Sarullah, PhD, UIB, Mr. David Tan, Ms. Rahmi Ayuda, UIB International Relations Office, UEL International Office, UIB IT Center, UIB General Fair, and the last but not least, all the participants. Thank you so much for your kind cooperation. This program is one of UIB effort to strengthen the collaboration with overseas partners due to the pandemic of COVID-19. Thank you, and wish your all students have a great experience during your participation in this event. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Lu, for the opening remarks. Okay, so after this, I would like to give a report for the program as the representative from the UIB International Relation Office. Okay, everyone. So once again, I would like to welcome Dr. Cook, the lecturer of economics faculty of University of Economics and Law, Vietnam, and then Mr. Tin from External Relations Office from UEL Vietnam, and also Dr. Lu Sudirman as the Dean of Law Faculty, Universitas Internasional Batam, and also Ms. Rina Sharula, PhD, Lecturer of Law Faculty, Universitas Internasional Batam, and also Mr. David Tan, SHMH, as the Lecturer of Law Faculty, UIB. So thank you for spending your time to join this seminar. So please allow me to report the International Trade Law Online Course, or ITLOC. So International Trade Law Online Course is an online course on international trade law, which is a collaborative program between UIB and UEL Vietnam. And we already started this program from June 7 to July 12, and today is the last day of the program. This program was firstly initiated by Law Faculty of UIB and Economics Law Faculty of UEL Vietnam. And this program expects the participants to understand the theoretical concept of international trade law and its comparison between Indonesian law and Vietnam law, as well as implement logical, critical, and systematical thoughts on cases that relate to the international trade law in its utmost integrity. Therefore, each session of the class was collaboratively taught by UIB and UEL lecturers. They are Mr. Dao Gia Phuc, PhD, Ms. Phu Kim Handung, PhD from UL Vietnam, and Ms. Rina Sharula, PhD, Mr. Davidan SHMH, and Ms. Rami Ayunda, SHMH from UIB. This program was attended by 18 students totally. So there are 8 students from UL Vietnam and 8 students from UIB. And the students collaboratively work together to write research articles as the output of this course in a mixed group consisting of UIB and UL students. So totally, there are 9 groups with 9 research articles. So after this, we are going to listen to the presentation on research articles. And I hope all of the audience can enjoy this seminar as well as enrich the knowledge specifically on international trade law. And on behalf of UIB, I would like to thank UL Vietnam, Mr. Phuc, Mr. Tin, to to help us, to assist us during this program and promote the program. And I also hope that UIB and UEL can conduct many programs in the future. So thank you very much. Okay, so after this, we will go to the main session, which is a presentation. Totally, we have 9 groups. So there will be 9 research articles in which each group will present approximately 15 minutes. And after that, for the lecturers, so I hope that you can give rich feedbacks and suggestions for the students after all of the groups have presented. Okay, so for the first group, I would like to invite the first group with the title, The Applicability of Force Majeure Clause During the COVID-19 Pandemic in Indonesia and France. So please, for group 1,
Yes.
you
hello.
may, yeah. Hello, Quentin.
Hello. So I have to share my screen with you. Did you see my screen? Do you see my screen? Or not? Okay. Okay. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Do you see the PowerPoint of our presentation?
Yep.
Okay,
Okay.
nice. So, hello everyone, and thank you for your participation in this webinar. My name is Quentin, and I'm attached to the University of Economics and Law from Ho Chi Minh City. With Cindy Kang, my teammate from the Universitas Batam International, we worked on the impact of COVID-19 on international contracts, and more particularly on the implementation of force majeure clauses in France and Indonesia. First of all, I would like to thank our 2 universities for allowing us to accomplish this legal research work on a subject as vast and as interesting as the one we're going to present you today. The global health crisis has been the vector of many complications in the legal business world, and today the question of the continuity of international contract is an essential issue for our economic and legal future. In fact, force majeure clauses did not appear with the pandemic, but the significant duration of the health crisis leads us to wonder if the conclusion of international contract today leaves room again for force majeure, where the COVID is now a known risk of all. As you will have understood, our presentation today will be a comparative law study on the qualification and invocation of force majeure within French and Indonesian law. This comparative study is all the more interesting as the Indonesian civil code never refers directly to force majeure, unlike French law, which provides for it in the civil code. So in order to complete this presentation, Cindy will start by presenting the introduction to our subject of study. After that, I will present our research method and our analysis and discussion to you. And finally, Cindy and I will discuss the respective situation concerning the invocation of force majeure in France and Indonesia before evoking the impact of the invocation of force majeure clauses and on international commercial contracts and concluding this presentation. Then please, Cindy, you can start to introduce our subject.
Okay, as we all know, almost the whole world is currently going through a COVID-19 pandemic. There are so many people lost their jobs, many people got sick and even died. And because of the uncertainty of when will the pandemic over, had caused a very negative impact on economic sector and increasing of poverty rates. Therefore, we can see that the COVID-19 pandemic of course has caused a big impact. And Indonesia and France are one of the many countries experiencing a crisis and recession during the COVID-19 pandemic. There are some countries strengthen their relationship by helping each other and collaborating to deal with the pandemic, but on the other hand, it can lead to a global economic political crisis. There are so many countries that implemented lockdown policies and applied export restrictions to minimize the spread of the virus. This is very difficult considering that Indonesia is still very dependent on imports to meet the essential needs during the pandemic. Such as food, medicine, health equipment, and many others. So we can see that the international trade, which plays a very important role, is also affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. As stated in the slide, can you do the next slide, please? Okay, so this presentation will focus on discussing how the impact of COVID-19 pandemic has on international business contracts, considering that the business contracts play an important role in international trade, and we will examine it from Indonesia and French legal perspective. So next, my partner will explain the legal profiles of Indonesia and France.
Okay, so before this explanation concerning our research methods, our work is based above all on a comprehensive approach between the legal situation in France and Indonesia. To achieve this, we used all of the databases to which we had access, like the written regulation on laws of our respective countries, or legal literature commenting on the evolution of international contract law since the start of the pandemic. Among these data, you can find the use of the Indonesian and French civil codes, the General Agreements on Tariff and Trade, GATT, the provision of the 1965 Vienna Convention and the law of treaties, or even some presidential decrees. Now, let's move on to the analysis and discussion. First of all, it should be noted that France and Indonesia are states of civil law, which applies a written law previously voted in parliaments. However, the situation in Indonesia is not exactly the same as in France due to the religious importance of Islam in Indonesia. Indeed, Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world, and as such, Indonesia has also adopted a mixed legal system, namely customary law and Islamic Sharia law. Conversely, France voted in 1905 a law proclaiming the separation of Catholic Church and state by making it a completely secular state of law. Unlike common law, the civil law used by France and Indonesia is based on the codification of law. In other words, the law is exclusively voted by the parliament before integrating the code to which it is attached. The law in Indonesia, like in France, is divided in two matters, usually called private law and public law. In Indonesia, What is meant by public law is the law that regulates relations regarding the public interest, such as criminal law, while private law is the law that regulates the relationship between individuals, such as civil law. The legal standards applied in Indonesia are the Constitution of 1945, the decree of the People's Consultative Assembly, the government regulations in lieu of laws, the government regulations, the presidential regulations, and the provincial regulations. More generally in France, private law represents the law governing a dispute between two private persons, where public law governs the relation between the French state and other states or natural person. Thus, there are two different legal matters that constitute public and private law, and are all separated between two distinct jurisdictions: the judicial judge, who deals with private law, and the administrative judge, who has jurisdiction if the dispute falls under public law. This organization, this jurisdictional organization, is called French jurisdictional dualism. In this system, the judges make use of the following legal standards. First of all, European law, constitution, international treaties, internal law, and regulation. So after this briefly presentation of the French and Indonesian legal systems, it is time to take an interest in the scope of force majeure in France, as well in Indonesia. And it's Cindy who will start by talking to you about force majeure in Indonesia. Please, Cindy.
Can you move to the next slide, please?
The next one?
Yes. Yeah, okay, thank you. Now I will explain to you about the scope of force majeure in Indonesia. Actually, in Indonesia, on 2020, there are two presidential decrees, such as Presidential Decree number 11 and Presidential Decree number 12, which stipulated that COVID-19 is a type of disease that can cause a public emergency and categorized as a non-natural disaster. This policy then raised a question whether the COVID-19 situation can be qualified as a force majeure or not. Before answering that question, we will first discuss how the legal standing of contract in Indonesia is. So, in Article 1338, Paragraph 1 on the Civil Code states that all agreements in accordance with law apply as a law for the parties who make them. So, it means the contract that has been made by the parties will form an engagement and legally bind the parties. The parties are obligated to fulfill the contents of the agreement as stated in the agreement they have made, which we know it as a pacta sunt servanda principles. If the content of the agreement are not fulfilled, then the party can be said to have a broken promise, or in Indonesia, we call it as one prestasi. Meanwhile, the definition of force majeure is an event that occurs beyond human ability and cannot be avoided, so that the obligation in the agreement cannot be carried out properly. We have to remember that there are four elements of force majeure. The first one is there is a change in the situation that did not occur at the time the agreement was made. The second, there's a change in a condition that is fundamental to the agreement. The third is there's a change in the situation that the parties could not have foreseen at the time the agreement was made. And the fourth one is the change that occurred are radical, which means that this circumstance changed the scope of the obligation in the agreement. So the presidential decree that I mentioned before, which states that COVID-19 is a national disaster, can be used as a legal basis to state that COVID-19 is a force majeure condition. But it does not necessarily make the presidential decree become the basis for canceling or deviating from previously made business contract. The existence of this presidential decree opens the opportunity for the parties to renegotiate while still being guided by the Article 1338 of the Civil Code. In addition, Indonesian law regulates force majeure in Article 1245 of the Civil Code, but it does not explicitly mention the word force majeure. Instead, it is known as state of coercion, or in Indonesia we call it as keadaan memaksa. So next, my partner are going to explain the scope of force majeure in France.
Thank you. So in France, before the 2016 reform of the obligation, force majeure was governed by the old Article 1220 of the Civil Code, which defined force majeure as an external, unpredictable, and irresistible elements. Since 2016, the new Article 12 18 is still the seat of force majeure in French law, but its definition has been revised. So today, there is the letter of the new article. There is force majeure in contractual matters when an event beyond the control of the debtor, which could not be reasonably foreseen when the contract was concluded and the effects of which cannot be avoided by appropriate measures, prevents the fulfillment of its obligation by the debtor. If the impediment is temporary, performance of the obligation is suspended unless the resulting delay justifies termination of the contract. If the impediment is final, the contract is automatically terminated and the parties are released from their obligation under the conditions provided for in Articles 1351 of the same code. And so forth, the legislator defines force majeure as an event beyond the control of the debtor, which could not be reasonably foreseen at the time of the conclusion of the contract and whose effect cannot be avoided by appropriate measure prevents the execution of its obligation by the debtor. Its invocation allows the debtor to be exempted from any obligation or, if the situation allows it, to postpone the maturity of the obligation in time. The adaptation of such a contractual rebalancing will be considered automatic if the parties provide in their agreements that it will adapt to the circumstances without the will of the parties being required. This adaptation will be considered semi-automatic if it involves the expression of the will of only one of the two parties. Finally, contractual adaptation will be considered as non-automatic if it requires the will of the two parties concerned for its effective implementation. It is therefore essential for business partners to know what constitutes force majeure and what not with regard to the various international contracts that they will be required to sign. As such, the doctrine, including the doctoral researcher Yazid Mazouzi from my university in France, has been led to identify some issues from this subject, and one of which will really hold our attention here. How is force majeure defined and what is the place of the COVID in this notion? Then we will focus on the automatic nature of the implementation of force majeure in order to adapt the international contract. Here, it will be a question of returning to the qualification and interpretation of force majeure within the international contract before questioning the outcome of the same contract in the event of invocation of such an event. Two qualifications of force majeure can be found in the clauses of the contract. A first qualification makes it an automatic application clause requiring no will of the parties. These are clauses which establish within the agreement an automatic adjustment process which will adapt the contract according to some evolution of various market parameters like currency inflation, evolution of evolution of the new price offered by the competition, etc. These clauses are in reality indexation clauses which take into account a certain economic reality in order to adapt the will of the parties to the realities of the market. It usually changes the amount of the cash obligation based on changes in indices measuring the price of a particular product or service or the general price level. These clauses have been accused of promoting inflation, so their validity has long been debated. But because of their usefulness, case law has accepted their validity without reservation in international payment for France. A second qualification makes force majeure an adaptation clause of the so-called semi-automatic international contract. Indeed, here it is no longer an annexation clause based on pre-established variable which is in the spotlight, but a real option offered to the party who suffers the disappointment resulting from an unforeseeable event and giving him the right to ask their contracting party to renegotiate or terminate the contract as appropriate. Here, what truly characterizes characterizes force majeure is the impossibility for one of the two parties to the contract to perform its contractual obligation. Therefore, it is now necessary to ask what are the essential components of the invocation of force majeure and if the COVID can be considered as such. The French legal order recognizes in domestic law and in the approach of international commercial law that the definition of force majeure falls under Article 1218 of the Civil Code. These articles provide that force majeure in contractual matters represent an event beyond the control of the debtor, one more time, which could not be reasonably foreseen at the time for the conclusion, during the conclusion of the contract, and whose effects cannot be avoided by appropriate measure prevents the performance of its obligation by the debtor. The article also specifies that the impediment is temporary, such as the restriction of movements during a pandemic, for example. The execution of the contract is suspended in order to preserve the economy of the contract. Conversely, if the impediment is irreversible and final, the contract will be terminated automatically and the parties are released from their obligation. Therefore, if we follow this legal definition, the COVID alone will not constitute a case of force majeure. Force majeure will actually result for one of the consequences directly related to COVID-19, such as restriction of movement of people and goods, and not from the disease itself. This is what the French courts have concluded. Each situation must be assessed on a case-by-case basis, favoring an assessment in concreto, as demonstrated by a trilogy of a decision by the Court of Appeal of Colmar, issued of March 16, 2020. A last question must then be asked. What about the continuity of the international contract in the event of force majeure? As provided for in the Article 1218 of the Civil Code, two possibilities await a contract affected by force majeure: the termination or the suspension. However, the classical theory of force majeure emphasizes its extinctive effect first and foremost. It is the principal nature of the international contract that has led practitioners to favor suspensive effect over extinctive effect. Indeed, the negotiation of a long-term international contract requires a considerable amount of work, which would be reduced to nothing if the only sanction of force majeure were the extinction of the obligations of both parties. Therefore, it seems preferable to favor the continuation of relations between international partners in order to avoid a new human and financial investment in the search for a new contract and maintain the economy of the contract initially desired by both parties. In this context, the suspension of the contract seems much more appropriate and allows economic players to have at their disposal a tailor-made tool to best react to unforeseen events, rather than having to systematically break the distorted contractual balance. This is how French practitioners in the international field saw the force majeure of the international contract. For them, exactly as in French domestic law, the international contract must lapse as soon as one of its essential elements disappears, making its execution impossible. And now, Cindy will talk about the COVID-19 impact towards force majeure in international trade. Please, Cindy.
Okay, first, at the international level, we have to remember that not all countries have the same classification regarding the COVID-19 virus. But in fact, many companies, the transportation, energy, shipping, and another sectors state that force majeure has forced them to suspend obligation in their contracts so that they must do a renegotiation effort to avoid fines or compensation due to the delays in the implementation of the contract. Maybe some of you can imagine a scenario where, for a case example, me and Quentin from France made a business agreement for the sale and purchase of 100 tons of grain, but the promised product could not be shipped due to the export restriction and lockdown in Indonesia. These effects of COVID-19 pandemic clearly interfere with the community activities, especially in the business sector. So, is this case can be qualified as a force majeure? First, we have to see In the legal theory, force majeure is divided into two types, namely absolute and relative. What is meant by absolute force majeure is that an event that occurs has absolutely nullified the ability of the parties to fulfill their obligation in the agreement. For example, the destruction of the object of the contract due to a natural disaster. Meanwhile, what is meant by relative force majeure is that the events that occur result in a change of circumstance, but there are still other alternatives to overcome these problems. The current COVID-19 pandemic can be classified as relative force majeure. So there are two possibilities that will occur due to the force majeure. The legal consequences can be in the form of terminating the agreement or delaying the fulfillment of obligation. The agreement can end if the impact caused by force majeure is permanent, whereas if the impact caused by force majeure is temporary, the parties can postpone the fulfillment of obligation in the contract. In other words, if the situation has recovered as before, then the parties are obligated to fulfill the obligation in the agreement. Basically, there are two levels regarding the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on international business contracts. The first level deals with the contracts that are made remotely and deals with the physical good or physical work, while the second level deals with the contract on e-commerce matters. In this regard, there are several types of contracts that are rarely affected by natural phenomena or force majeure circumstance compared to business contract in general. The impact caused by the first level circumstance can be in the form of cessation of production, termination of construction, termination of employment, and other things that occur as a result of the lockdown during COVID-19 pandemic, which was implemented by several countries so as to make the parties unable to fulfill their obligation in the contract. The obstacles experienced by the parties in this case are very clear, that the parties come from different countries, and of course each country has their own effort to stop the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. This is an obstacle for the parties in implementing the contents of the contract that they have agreed on. So, in the GATT agreement, it is stated that the aggrieved party has the right to request renegotiation with the aim of changing the terms of the contract. Furthermore, Article 81 of the Vienna Convention states that if the negotiation process does not reach an agreement or fails, the party can cancel or terminate the contract and the aggrieved party can claim compensation. Basically, there are two ways to settle dispute, namely litigation and non-litigation. Next, my partner will talk about the conclusion.
Yes, but yeah. To conclude this presentation on time, we can see that if the debtor in an international business contract has an obstacle in fulfilling the contents of the agreement due to COVID-19 as a force majeure condition, then the parties can renegotiate the contract. Basically, there are two ways to settle disputes, namely litigation and non-litigation. Litigation is a dispute resolution route carried out in court. Meanwhile, non-litigation is a dispute resolution carried out outside the court. Thank you for your attention. We make a little bit longer than our prediction, but thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Quentin and Cindy. Okay, so I would like to invite the group 2. So Quentin, you can stop sharing. Okay, thank you very much for the great presentation. Okay, so now I would like to invite the group 2 with the presentation entitled Reviewing History of International Trade Law in Indonesia and Panama. So for group 2, please.
Yes. Can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes, already.
Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Lala Auralita from Batam International University, and I'm with my partner, Alex Irmuti from Pateon Asas University, and we are from Group 2. So in today's presentation, we are going to talk about the history of international trade law in Indonesia and Panama. Next slide, please.
Can you see it?
I cannot see it.
I think it changed.
Yes, it already changed to the second slide.
Oh, okay. So in this slide, we're going to talk the brief profile and legal system. So in Indonesia, Indonesia is located between two continents, namely the Australian continent and the Asian continent, and flanked by the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and the South China Sea. Indonesia is known for its status as the largest maritime country in the world, with a total area of 5,180,083 square kilometers. So Indonesia itself adheres to the civil law legal system. This is because Indonesia is a former colony of European countries. Also, the model of the Indonesian legal state is Rechtsstaat, which has a trias politica.
On the other side of the globe, the Republic of Panama, located in the Central America, is bordered by Costa Rica to the northwest, Colombia to the southeast, and the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific Ocean to the southwest. Its territory of 75,000 square kilometers, smaller than South Carolina, is populated by 4.24 million people. Due to its advantageous geographical location, the central region of Panama occupies an exceptional place in global maritime trade by taking advantage of the continued growth of trade. Furthermore, the law of Panama is based on civil law with influences from Spanish legal tradition and Roman laws. This study explores Indonesian and excuse me. Okay. Could you? Yeah. Thank you. This study explores Indonesia and Panama's economic histories. The aim of this presentation is to comprehend the gradual emergence of two future global economic powers. Notwithstanding being geographically and historically apart, these two countries have successfully integrated into international trade to the point where they have been the economic leaders of their respective areas since the turn of the 21st century. This research attempts to trace the events that reshaped the economies of India, Indonesia, and Panama through time, in order to enable you to envision the world in the decades of 2030 to 2040.
Okay, in the next slide, there's research methods. So in carrying out this research, the type of research used by the author is using normative legal research methods, but this legal research is more commonly known as doctrinal legal research, mentioned as doctrinal legal research because the research is only aimed at written regulations. So this research is very closely related to libraries, and this normative law requires secondary data. The purpose of secondary data is that the data obtained from the community and has been processed by primary data collectors. Next slide. And now we are going into the discussion. So the first one is the history of international trade law in Indonesia. So Indonesia history of international trade began to be active in the 3rd century, especially with India. Then in the 5th century, the condition of Indonesia commodities developed rapidly, especially the spices. This made West Asian traders interested in entering Indonesia. Actually, this progress was experienced by the Sriwijaya Kingdom because in ancient times, Indonesia was ruled by kingdoms in each region. So Sriwijaya ability to control trade and shipping only lasts from the 7th century to the mid-12th century. This happened because the traders switched routes to Malacca. But before Malacca could take over control of the trade, Majapahit had already taken the opportunity by taking advantage of Bubat and Canggu ports. Then in the 15th century, Majapahit was destroyed because of the struggle for power and civil war. In the 15th century, Malacca regained controls of trade routes and received attention from various countries, such as Arabia, China, India, Persia, and Europe. As a result, in 1511, Malacca was controlled by the Portuguese. However, because the Portuguese implemented a burdensome trade policy, eventually the traders turned to the ports of Banten, Banda, Palembang, and Sunda Kelapa. Then, in the 16th century, Indonesia was colonized by the Dutch. It began with the entry of the VOC, which at that time was disguised as a trading partnership, until finally the VOC slowly began to open branch bases in Ambon, Banda, and Jayakarta. A brief history, finally the VOC collapsed due to corrupt, and VOC was dissolved on December 31, 1799. Since the VOC disbanded, Indonesia was handed over to the Dutch government and changed its name to the Dutch East Indies. For 100 years, Indonesia was colonized by draining its natural resources and enslaving Indonesian workers. A short history leading up to 1945, Indonesia finally liberated itself from the invaders. However, this doesn't mean that Indonesia is free from adversity, because in my opinion, this is the beginning of Indonesia to improve its economy. Then in 1972, Indonesia began drafting its trade law and finally passed it on February 11, 2014, after being repeatedly rejected by the president. This trade law was made so that Indonesia could be separated from the regulation of the Dutch East Indies government. In addition, Indonesia also finally has a law on maritime affairs, which was passed on September 29, 2014. Given that trade law and maritime law are closely related to international trade. And finally, the latest news from Indonesia in 2020 is that its economy is experiencing a slump due to the COVID-19 pandemic. All export and import activities are postponed. Based on the data from the Central Statistic Agency, in the first quarter of 2020, economic growth in Indonesia was still positive. It's 2.97%. However, in the second quarter of 2020, it fell to minus 5.32%. And in the third quarter of 2020, it fell to minus 3.49%. Based on this data, Indonesia will make little progress in the third quarter of 2020 and developments continue until now.
Okay, so now we'll review the history of international trade law in Panama. In the early 16th century, the Spanish conquistadors used Panama to bring gold and silver from Peru to Spain. This period marked the beginning of the country's insertion into the world of international trade. Panama's economy has then significantly grown in the mid-19th century with the development of cargo ships and numerous merchants attracted by the California gold rush. In 1880, France launched the project of a canal linking the Pacific Ocean to Atlantic Ocean. Due to an epidemic of malaria and yellow fever on the construction site of the Panama Canal, the project had to be delayed and led to the bankruptcy of the French company, which was in charge of the canal construction project. Thanks to an agreement signed in 1904 between the United States and the newly independent state of Panama, the construction of the canal could be taken over by the United States. The canal was completed in 1914, and between the years 1950 and 1930, the traffic of the Panama Canal increased every year by 15%. The World Economic Depression of the 1930, however, impacted Panama's international trade by reducing the trade flows through its canal and led to a massive layoff of employees working in the terminal cities. These workers then reoriented themselves in subsistence agriculture. At the end of the 1950 years, Panamanian leaders were faced with numerous demonstrations of varying degrees of violence, aim at defending and asserting Panamanian sovereignty in the face of US administration of the canal. On 1964, when demonstrators wanted to symbolically raise the Panamanian flag in a US controlled area of the canal, police repression left several people dead. Following this day of violence, renamed Dia de los Martires, Panama decided to break off its diplomatic relation with the USA. General Omar Torrijos, leader of the Panamanian Revolution, became the sole leader of the country until 1981. In power, he began negotiation to develop a new bilateral treaty between Panama and the United States. The treaty signed on 1977 provided for the end of the Panama Canal Company, the dismantling of the canal zone, and the return of the territories under American administration. The handover of the canal to the Panamanian authorities radically transformed the country's economic model. The Panama Canal Authority's financial contribution in 2013 was close to $1 billion, more in 1 year than all the US payments in 96 years. It was mainly during the years, the 90s, that internationalization intensified, especially with competition policy that allowed economy modernization and generated profound structural changes in the country. Gradually, the country adopted a common set of neoliberal measures, such as privatization of state enterprise, market liberalization, development of public-private partnership, and many trades agreements were signed between 1996 and 2013. In 2011, Panama became a member of the Latin American Integration Association. This strategy made Panama one of the most economically connected countries in the Latin American continent, behind Mexico and Brazil. Financial transparency remains an important issue for Panama, which is heavily dependent of foreign investment and has created a credible and efficient financial center. With the Panama Papers revelation, which have led Panama to ratify the Convention of 2017 on mutual administrative assistance for the exchange of tax information, and 2 fundamental laws to enable financial transparency, which have come into force. Amidst the global economic meltdown caused by COVID-19, the Panama Canal is experiencing a small economic miracle. Indeed, pandemic or not, the Panama Canal has not been closed for a single moment to connect container ships. In fact, more than 30 of them pass through every day. Victim of the pandemic? No, on the contrary, Panama has suffered a decrease in traffic on its canal of 20% between May and July 2020. However, the year 2020 ended very well since the goods transported increased by 1%. Panama ended the year 2020 with an increase in revenue thanks to its canal.
Okay, so now we move on to the next slide. This is still part of the discussion. This is about the similarities and the differences. So the first one, the similarities between Indonesia and Panama in the world of trade is about the same. The strategic location of Indonesia and Panama makes them a world trade and shipping route. In Panama, they have water canals, or more commonly known as canals. This route is passed by many ships from various countries with the aim of accelerating international trade routes. Meanwhile, Indonesia has many ports connecting Asia and Europe. And the second similarity is the enormous potential of marine and fisheries, so that most of the state's income is obtained from it. This happens because Indonesia and Panama have vast maritime power.
Now for the differences. Indonesia is the world's largest producer and user, accounting for roughly half of global supply. Indonesia has much more has a much more varied trade than Panama. In Indonesia, agriculture accounts for 28 of GDP, industry accounts for 22 of GDP, and services account for 50% of GDP. As for Panama, agriculture represents 2% of GDP, industry corresponds to 15% of GDP, and services represent 82 of GDP. So in 2019, Indonesia exported nearly 186 billion goods, while Panama exported only 15 billion. Panama's main customers are the United States, while Indonesia customers are more varied, mainly China, the United States, and Japan. A final indication of Indonesia lead over Panama is the significant number of bilateral agreements signed by Indonesia. Indeed, Indonesia has signed treaties with a large number of countries all around the world. Indonesia has agreements with countries in Africa, South and North America, South and North Asia, Europe, and Oceania. On the other hand, although Panama has developed its number of bilateral agreements over the last 20 years, they remain much less extensive than those of Indonesia. Indeed, Panama has trade agreements with only 40 countries. So to conclude, Indonesia and Panama are two dominant countries in the southern hemisphere. Among the developing countries, both Indonesia and Panama have established themselves as true economic leaders in their category. Although these two countries are located in drastically different geographical areas, the economic achievements for these two countries over the last 20 years are absolutely remarkable. Indeed, in 2019, Indonesia GDP accounted for about 35% of Asian GDP, and Indonesia ranked as the 16th largest economy in the world. By 2030, Indonesia could be the 10th largest economy in the world. On the other side of the globe, Panama has been the fastest growing Latin America economy over the last 10 years. The dollarized country, however, does not have its own monetary policy and is totally dependent of the policy of the US Fed. If Panama succeeds in diversifying its economy in the next few years, it could become one of the world's largest economy as well. So that's it for our presentation, and I would like to thank you all for your attention.
Okay, thank you for Alexander and Lala for the presentations. Okay, so for the next presentation, I will invite group 3.
Yes, so, it would be me and Kevin.
Yeah, so entitling Reviewing History of International Trade Law in Indonesia and France. Okay, time is yours.
Okay, so Kevin will share his screen for our presentation.
Okay, wait a minute.
So our presentation today will be about an historical review about French and Indonesian international trade law. And it will focus about the common roots and common legal roots of both these countries. I will wait that Kevin share the screen.
If my screen is already seen?
No, it's all black, Kevin. Yes.
Okay, okay.
The first slide. Okay, so, perfect. Then first of all, we will focus about the current international trade legalization. Nowadays, international trade law is well harmonized by GATT and WTO legal work, and it's hard to find a lot of differences, and it's easier to find similarities between legal systems nowadays. But our presentation, our objective of research was to find a lot of similarities between French and Indonesia legal system, even if both of them were quite different. So Kevin will present the Indonesian legal system, and after that I will present the French one.
So I will explain about the Indonesian mixed legal system. So first of all, basically, Indonesia has the same sources of legal system with the French. It is about civil law since by the historical perspective, the civil law was brought by Dutch, which was adopted from France also. So Indonesia has also the civil law system, but in practically, Indonesia using all of the four biggest legal system in the world. So for example, here, civil law, the most dominant legal system for Indonesia. And the second one is common law, and in some practical of judgment in some cases also, and Islamic law. And we do believe as well there is one province using Islamic law as the most dominant legal system. It is Aceh province. And also the last one is customary law, since Indonesia has 34 provinces. And so we can conclude there are so many customary law because Indonesia has so many provinces there. Okay, so my partner will explain about the France itself, since France using purely civil law. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Whereas Indonesia is a mixed legal system with a dominance over the civil law system. France is only a civil law system, and it was influenced by Roman law and canonical law. And nowadays we can say that another source of the French civil legal system is European law. But both of those countries joined early on GATT in 1940 and the WTO organization since their creation. But the main point of our article and presentation today is to prove that since even if they didn't share any contact through history, their legal system were influenced by one another. So Kevin, can you put the next slide, please?
Okay.
So thanks to the Silk Road in the Middle Ages and until its disappearance in the 15th century, Indonesia and France were able to have a lot of connection about doctrine and legal theory. For example, the letter of change, bank system, and the construction of legal contract was influenced by one another. And after that, in the 15th century, when the Dutch arrived in Indonesia, their legal system were a lot influenced by the French one, and it was almost a copy of the French one. So we can say that even if France was not part of the Indonesian colonization, it was made by the Dutch, their legal colonization until the independence of Indonesia was as if the French was present. So in our article, we base our research objective on three subtitles: fairness and good faith in trade, the definition of national maritime zone, and customer law rights. Those three subtitles were part of many similarities between those two legal systems, but we think that it was it was the best one to select because since we are mainly focused on normative data and legal normative data, we use secondary data and especially WTO cases and GATT cases to prove our point. After that, for the research for the research method, we used a comparative and quantitative method each time for each subtitle, and Kevin will develop a bit more about this.
So okay, for the research methods, since the current situation, we do believe as well that pandemic. So we're using normative legal research as Aurel has explained before. And for the research objects, we're using primary and also the secondary data. For the primary, we're using some codes such as civil codes and any law that related to trade, especially international trade, and also some maritime law. And for the secondary data, we're using some law journals and also some supportive historical journals, since we are talking about historical perspective. And for the data collection technique, we are searching for the journal within the library research for supporting our article. And last, the data analysis methods, we're using the comparative legal research, but within the historical perspective. Okay, so Aurel will explain the similarities first. The first point of fairness and good faith in trade.
So the fairness and good faith in both of the Indonesian and French legal system are from the civil code. The Indonesian civil code were an inspiration of the Dutch one, and the Dutch one were itself an inspiration of the Napoleon Code, the French civil code of 1804. The 1804 French civil codes refer itself to the notion of good faith in multiple articles, such as the article 1245 or 2268, and it refers to fairness to the principle of family man, bon père de famille in French. And since the Indonesian civil code is an inspiration of the French one, even if the articles are not the same today, the principles are the same. So through history, their definition of good faith and fairness was the same, and they remain the same. And we prove our point through two WTO cases, one from GATT and one most recent with the WTO cases, case number, excuse me, case number GS 123. Kevin will now explain the similarities between the national maritime zone definition.
Okay, first of all, I will add some information of similarities in fairness and good faith in trade. I will explain a little bit more. So we do believe as well, if we are talking about trade in Indonesia, there are two related kind of regulation in our opinion. The first one is the civil code, which the other name of it is Burgerlich Wetboek. And also the second one is regulation that related to or trade regulation. And since Indonesia has a civil code within the actual name, which I have already said before, to be precise, under the article of 1338, it is stated a manufacturing contract should be done with the principle of good faith. So here we can conclude briefly that Indonesia has a really kind of similarity with the French principle about the fairness and good faith in trade, since it is also stated clearly in the 1338 of Burgerlich Red Book. And also, it's not only implemented for establishment of personal use or regional scale, but also for the bigger scope in international trade. And also, for example, we have cases that related to anti-dumping measures on A4 copy paper, and it was around 2019 within the Indonesia greatly respected to this principle and applied it to the jurisdiction, to the trial. And the second one will be explained by Aurel firstly from French perspective.
So the second one is the definition of the maritime zone. The maritime zone was doctrine. Sorry, the maritime zone definition doctrine was developed by Hugo Grotius, in the Dutch jurist and philosopher in the 1960s, and this doctrine was challenged by an English one who. Which provides that all the sea have to be the property of the first countries that discover it. Grotius' doctrine were more flexible, and it was made to facilitate all the international trade because in his doctrine he emphasized that all sea has to be free and has to be navigable by all nations, not just the ones that discover it. Indonesia, through the Dutch influence, chose to follow Grotius' definition, and France, in antagonized through England, chose to follow Grotius' definition too. So both of Indonesia and France decide to follow Grotius' definition, and at the end, in the 19th century, it was Grotius and not the English definition that succeed. And nowadays, the 3 miles doctrines that rule all over the world and are implemented by WTO is made from Grotius' doctrine. What is the 3 miles doctrine? Is that 3 miles around every land owned by a country is legal legal ownership from it, and it's derived from Grotius' work Mare Liberum. So again, we can see that in both civil codes and through GATT cases, that the definition of Mare Liberum made by Grotius is the same. The Camuco case of 1999 for France based itself on this definition. It was a conflict between France and Panama, and the French court used the definition of the national maritime zone to argue all of his points and to be proven right. And Kevin will introduce the other WTO case.
Okay, thank you. So I will continue the explanation about national maritime zone laws, since Indonesia also applied the same principle as France, the Mare Liberum. So I will explain about it briefly from the law number 1 of 1973. It's regarding to the continental borderlines of Indonesia, and there are some of the division which stated in the regulation, and we believe as well if we have already learning some of it. And for the international case, okay, this is the international case in international scale, we found the dispute of Natuna Sea is one of the example, the most related case for this explanation. Okay, so the related thing is the principle of mare liberum itself. Literally, mare liberum, and technically, it has the meaning of freedom of the sea. So basically, all of the countries in the world can use all of the seas freely. But there is one more thing to be considered, that there is an exception. So all countries can use all of the seas around the world, but at glance it's not literal meaning. But the exception is for local fishing and national barriers. So there is the exception for the fishermen and also national barriers. So basically, there is something should be concerned about local fishing consideration and so the national barriers. So there is such a borderline, such of a boundary to the definition of the mare liberum itself. So that's how Indonesia can apply the principle of this premise of the legal system, legal principle, national maritime zone laws into this case. And for the next principle will be explained by Aurel again about the customer rights. I'm sure.
Okay, so in France, customer rights is very important. And France was the first country in Europe and one of the first countries in the world to create a code specifically for customer rights. Indeed, in 2000, in 1972, France created its first code of consommation, code de la consommation. It's one of the first code, as I said, and it implements a lot of customer rights. Customer rights now is in France influenced a lot by European law, but France is one of the leaders of this doctrine, of this legal doctrine. Each year, 1 to 3 regulation is taken to protect the customer over all the professional. And we can see that even if it's not the old area of law, it has influenced a lot of different branch of law in France. For example, the contract area, the firm area, or international trade law. And it is the same in Indonesia, and Kevin will develop a bit more about this.
So I will explain by the Indonesian perspective, as Aurel has mentioned it formally. About the consumer rights, this principle is also greatly important, just like the two previous one. And for Indonesia, concerning to law number 8 of 1999 regarding to the consumer protection, this principle is clearly stated there, especially for Article 4, which is containing 9 main points about consumer rights. Other than that, also some of the rules for businessmen. So it's not only regulate about the consumer itself, but also for the businessmen who technically become the producer of some products. And for the WTO case that we took is also about dumping, just like the case that I have explained in the fairness and good faith in trade principle. So I will explain a little bit more about the dumping. So the meaning of the dumping is, as I read in some literatures, that dumping means making the price in the other country lower or cheaper than the country of the producer of the product. So I will give example for in briefly situation. For example, country A produce a product called motorcycle, and then country A export it to the country B and also country C. But the price in country B and C are cheaper and lower rather than the country A, whereas the country A was the producer of the product, of that motorcycle product. So this is technically contradictory with the principle of consumer rights, since consumers need to know the true, the factual, and also the actual information about the product. And also, it's stated between among the of the 9 main points that I have already mentioned before in Law Number 8 of 1999. So this is one of the perfect case. It is regarding to the dumping, and it's related also to the consumer rights, since dumping is technically against the one of the consumer rights in Article 4. Between that 9 main points. Okay, so without further ado, after we explain about the similarities, I will explain more about the differences. So here's the differences. We considered that definitely there are a lot of differences between legal system in Indonesia and also France, and we also have stated it in the slide number 2 about the legal system, which Indonesia using mixed legal system, but France using purely civil law. Okay, but the most prominent is history itself, since we're talking about historical perspective. So I will explain the differences is come from the histories began. So here, what do we mean with the histories began is about regulations were started. In Indonesia, the regulation was created along with the establishment of some Hindu-Buddhist kingdoms, especially in Sriwijaya Empire. So the most prominent international trade was started there within the relation with merchants from China and also India. So there was a customary policy called paksaan menimbun barang. So literally, it means merchants from India and also China should came over to the port of Sriwijaya Empire and pay some tariffs, also taxes. Since Sriwijaya Empire, port of Sriwijaya Empire was nearly with the Strait of Malacca, which Strait of Malacca is one part of the Silk Road in maritime route. While France started the legal system since BC, to be precise, since 51, around 51 and also or 50 BC. And the other differences is how the civil law was applied in both countries. Since me and also Aurel already stated that Indonesia was adapt the legal system from Dutch, but formally Dutch also adapt the legal system from France and then applied in Indonesia when colonialism era within some adjustment. So here are the differences. Indonesia adapt the civil law, while France is one of the country which made the civil law. So this is the one of the most prominent differences for the historical perspective. And for the next, and the last will be explained by Aurel about the conclusion. Time is yours.
Yeah. And Kevin, just before return to the next to the previous slide a bit, please.
Okay.
Because the last differences between France and Indonesia is the perception of customers' rights. In France, customer rights has been regarded by foreign country as too restrictive and too protective, and some says that it bars international trade from foreign investor and foreign actor. And in Indonesia, customer rights is not regarded as too strict and too developed. So, as Kevin said, we can conclude our presentation saying that France and Indonesia shared a lot of legal common roots based on civil law system, but through the influence of GATT and WTO that both countries joined early on, further similarities in the legal system will be found, but not based on civil law, but on common law, because most of the GATT and WTO regulation are based on common law doctrine. Thank you for your attention, and that will conclude our presentation.
Okay, so thank you, Aurel and Kevin. So please, Kevin, you can start sharing. Thank you. Okay, for next presentations from Group 4, entitling the engagement of Indonesia and Taiwan on World Trade Organization in historical and political perspective. So for Group 4, time is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I am Inradu, and my partner is Angel Tim. We did our paper on the engagement of Indonesia and Taiwan in the WTO in historical and political perspective. The objective of the research is to compare the engagement of Indonesia and Taiwan in the WTO in historical and political perspective. In terms of research method, we use normative legal research with focus on qualitative research. The materials include published journals, newspaper, internet, legal dictionary. Due to COVID-19, the research is solely done via internet. Before learning about engagement of Taiwan in the WTO, one needs to better understand Taiwan. So I will briefly introduce Taiwan to all. Taiwan's formal name is Republic of China. Many have confused it with People's Republic of China. It has a population of about 23.52 million people with 36,193 square of kilometer in size. Its GDP is about 759.104 billion US dollars, which is ranked 21st in the world. And OECD has ranked its education as number 4 in the world, despite of the fact that Taiwan has no natural resource and that it is such a small country. Due to education, it has fared quite well internationally. In terms of World Economic Forum, Taiwan ranked 12th in the world. In innovation, it ranked 5th in the world, first in Asia. In IMD, ranked 11. Its foreign reserve is about 478.126 trillion US dollar, which allowed it to rank 5th in the world. And the judicial yuan is the highest judicial organ of the government, which runs a constitutional court and oversees a court system in Taiwan. And Taiwan has a three-tier court system for civil and criminal cases. There are Supreme Court, High Courts, and District Courts. Taiwan has had an unique political situation internationally, in which it was under the shadow of the One China policy. This policy states that Taiwan is a part of China. It sees Taiwan as a breakaway province, which is to be reunified one day. This policy, or what I call the China issue, has greatly hindered Taiwan in claiming sovereignty and in turn made it difficult to enter international organizations. Due to the China issue, WTO had defined Taiwan to be a separate customs territory processed for autonomy in a conduct to its external commercial relations. And now my partner Angel will make presentation on Indonesia.
Okay, thank you, Eric. This is Indonesia's profile. Indonesia is a country in Southeast Asia between Indian and Pacific Ocean. It consists over 17,000 islands. Including Sumatra, Java, Sulawesi, and a part of Borneo and New Guinea. Indonesia is the world's largest island country and the 14th largest country by land area. It at 1,904,569 kilometers, with more than 270.6 million people. Indonesia is the world's fourth most popular country and the most populous Muslim majority country. Java Island is the world's most populous island and is home to more than half of the country's population. Indonesia is a presidential and constitutional republic with an elected legislature. It has 34 provinces, of which 5 has special status. The country's capital is Jakarta, which is the world's second most populous urban area. The country shares land borders with Papua New Guinea, East Timor, and the eastern part of Malaysia. Other neighboring countries, including Singapore, Vietnam, the Philippines, Australia, Palau, and India, which is the Andaman and Nicobar Island. Despite its largest population and densely populated regions, Indonesia has vast area of wilderness that support one of the world's highest level of biodiversity. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the Indonesian legal system. Indonesian main legal system is civil legal system, or we call as continental European legal system. The continental European legal system is a legal system characterized by the existence of various systematic codified legal provision, which will be further interpreted by judges in their application. So the legal system is passed down from colonial era from the Dutch. Besides of that, Indonesia also adopted common law for a few cases, Islamic law in a special province like in Nanggroe Aceh Darussalam. There is also customary law based on Indonesian diverse culture and custom norms. So the law here is divided to 2 laws. The first one is private law. So I think I got mixed up. So the first is private law. The private law includes civil agreement law and commercial law. The second one is the public law, which include criminal law and constitutional law. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so the first is Indonesia engagement in GATT and WTO. Indonesia is one of the founding members of WTO, and it has passed down to law number 7 in 1994 to approve the establishment of the WTO.
Indonesia has been a member of the WTO since it joined the GATT on February 24, 1950, as a commitment to the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade and the WTO. Indonesia has accepted the 2005 protocol to amend the TRIPS agreement, which is accepted on October 20, 2011, and the protocol to the agreement on trade facilitation accepted on December 5, 2017. Government procurement, information technology agreement, and the participation in joint initiative, including the Development Committee and Investment Promotion and Electronic Commerce, and participate in many regional and global negotiating groups, such as Asian Developing Members, ASEAN, APEC, and Change Group. As a member of the WTO, Indonesia is also bound by various agreements, such as the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, the General Agreement on Trade in Service or GATT, and the Agreement on Trade-Related Property Right or TRIPS, and Agreement on Trade-Related Investment Measures or TRIM. Although the vision of the objective of the WTO agreement is to benefit member states, in fact, it is difficult for member states such as developing countries like Indonesia. They are not ready yet to achieve it. They require responsibility and capacity that developing countries, including Indonesia, must fulfill cannot be implemented. Although some countries in Asian region are very cautious in accepting opportunity and managing strategy in the process of achieving objective of the WTO. The purpose of establishing the WTO is to promote trade between countries, which started in many countries that have experienced trade barrier. These obstacles can be detected in many areas that must be protected. For example, by injecting subsidies into government's legal policy as the implementation of the development policies. The implementation of this approach contradicts the general principle of Article 1 and 3 and some specific principle, such as Article 6 of the WTO, harm the importing country's subsidies or dumping. But developing country has given exception in the implementation of Article 1 and Article 3 under the fairness principle. This principle was the result of agreements reached by the country in the world, are stated in the final act in the year 1964 relating to the rights and obligation in the world economy, including rights and obligation to obtain reciprocal benefit fairly. So WTO law provide rule for bridging trade liberalization with values and other social interests. This rule exists in the form of a very broad exception to the discipline foundation of the WTO. This exception allows WTO members in certain circumstances to adopt and maintain the rule and measure of use, protect the value, and other very important social interests. Even if the rules are against the substantive discipline contained in the 1994 GATT, the exception can be grouped into several types, include the exception to Article 20 of the GATT, which exception in bridging trade liberalization with values and interests. All the social exception are the general exception listed in Article 20 of the GATT in determining whether an action that should be consistent with the rules GATT can be justified. Then the second one is the exception to Article 14 of GATT on trade in service. What WTO member can justify what they should do not get compliant. And the third one is exception for economic development. Almost all agreement in the WTO regulate regarding special and different treatment for developing country to facilitate them to enter the system world trade to promote economic development. And the fourth one, the last one, is the exception in economic emergency. When there is a surge situation, import that cause and threat to cause serious losses. In general action, this contrary to Article 2 and Article 11. However, it can still be justified under the Article 19 of GATT in 1994 if it can meet all the requirements that contained in the article. Okay, that is all from me from Indonesia. I will pass it down to the Taiwan engagement. Back to you, Eric.
Thank you, Encho. Thank you, Angel. And that many people don't know that Taiwan was actually one of 23 founding members of GATT. However, due to the China issue, from 1947 on, Taiwan has been in and out of GATT as observers. In 1990, Taiwan tried to rejoin GATT under the name Separate Customs Territory of Taiwan, Penghu, Kinmen, and Matsu. However, was not being admitted until it became WTO. Under the GATT Article 33 and WTO Agreement Article 12, Taiwan used the name Separate Customs Territory of Taiwan, Penghu, Kinmen, and Matsu, short for Chinese Taipei, and obtained membership in WTO on January 1st, 2002, as 144 member of WTO without the sponsorship from China. There are much similarities in the engagement of WTO for Indonesia and Taiwan. However, the differences can be seen in terms of regulation, utilized in entrance requirement, time of being admitted, and the level of difficulty in joining the WTO. For Indonesia, it was admitted into GATT on February 24, 1950. From then on, smoothly transferred its seat in the WTO and became one of the founders of WTO. And moreover, because of its being recognized as a state, it had not had any setback or other countries interfering its entrance into either GATT or WTO. Taiwan, on the other hand, had to deal with the China issue for years and had to enter WTO under another name due to political reasons. And in conclusion, one of the main reasons for the international community to join GATT and WTO is to increase international activities that can benefit their members economically. Indonesia and Taiwan are both members of WTO. However, it was more difficult for Taiwan. It seemed that statehood recognition is a critical issue for joining an international organization. For Taiwan, with the ever-growing China issue, joining WTO set a precedent for future application in allowing it to enter other international organizations. So as we can say, that is quite significant. And thank you.
Okay, thank you, Eric and Angel, for the presentations. And we will go to the next presentations from Group 5 about general principles of international trade law from Indonesian and Vietnamese perspectives.
Yes, hello. I'm trying to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
Yes, already.
Okay. So, wait. So, hello everyone. My name is Juliette and I will present the general principles of international commercial law from French and Indonesian perspective with my partner Ria Veronica. First, I'll introduce the two countries and talk about the legal system. France is an industrialized country with the world's 7th largest economy by nominal GDP. It is a semi-presidential representative republic based on the Constitution and the Fifth Republic, approved in 1958. France uses a civil legal system, which means that judges are not to make law, but interpret it. French legal system is divided into public law, including administrative and constitutional law on one side, and private law, including criminal and civil law on the other side. Therefore, France has a dual court system composed of judicial courts and administrative courts. Indonesian is often classified as a newly industrialized country with the largest economy of Southeast Asia and the world's 16th largest economy by nominal GDP. Indonesia is a presidential representative republic based on the Constitution of 1945. It uses a mixed legal system mainly based on the civil law system, which derives from the Dutch colonial law, but it is also based on the customary legal system and the religious legal system. Indonesia legal system is also divided into private law and public law, and therefore its court system is also dual with judicial and administrative courts. So now I'm going to present the objectives of our article. The first question we had to answer is how to define the general principles of international commercial law. Indeed, we found different points of view in our researches. Some authors define them as very basic rules, which are broader and more abstract than principles, such as the one mentioned in the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. Thus, the general principles would not be consistent with specific codified rules. However, most definitions include principles presented in international conventions. So we decided to base our analysis on this broader definition. Then we had to analyze the significance of international trade conventions and their regulations with a main focus on the World Trade Organization principles. Our main objective regarding the World Trade Organization was to identify the place of France and Indonesia regarding this organization, especially through the scope of some case law, which marked an evolution of the regulations of international trade law. At last, we aim to analyze how these general principles are applied in France and Indonesia, which can be difficult since these principles are produced by many different sources. One of the most interesting findings was the codification of these principles through the UNIDROIT principles to harmonize and facilitate their application. And now Ria will present you with the research methods.
Okay, now I will present about research methods. The paper applies normative legal research design. Normative legal research is a research design in which the process of the research has the goal to discover a certain rule of law, principles, or doctrine to solve a current legal issue. Normative legal research is also known as the literature study of doctrinal research. Its connection to literature and secondary data, which consists of published paper and related journal. Next. Discussion. I will explain about Indonesia perspective about international trade law. As we know, Indonesia has ratified to GATT, or General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, on February 24, 1950, and joined the WTO World Trade Organization in February 24, 1950, through the law
of the Republic of Indonesia, number 7, year 1994. Now, second, benefits of the form of protection from fraud, dumping, and police discrimination. In addition, Indonesia also feels the impact in the form of ease in conducting international trade. Of course, there are negative impacts arising from this ratification, where many foreign multinational companies control strategic trade sectors such as water, food, clothing, and others. So it poses a threat to the existence of national companies in Indonesia. These national companies in Indonesia also treat by traders in Indonesia due to the large number of imported products that come in at low price so that it can reduce public interest in our local public products. The most fatal impact is the decline in the economy caused by the emergence of dependence on developed countries and trusting foreign products more than local products. Ladies and gentlemen, there are several cases of international trade that occurred in Indonesia with other countries. The first case is the case of Timor National Car with Japan and European Union in July 1996. The government officially launched a national car project called Timor in collaboration with Kia Motors, a South Korean car manufacturer. Because it was labeled a national car, import duties attached on luxury goods on the sale this car were cut so that the price was half the price of the average car at the time. Second case, the biodiesel case with the European Union in January 2018. Indonesia won against the European Union in the case of imposing anti-dumping import duties, or BMAD, for biodiesel products. The WTO, World Trade Organization, has won 6 Indonesian lawsuits against the European Union. Several years earlier, the European Union did apply BMAD at 8.8% to 23.3% for biodiesel products from Indonesia. The policy broke the value of biodiesel export to the European Union in Tunis and has continued to decline since 2013. The last case, clean cigarette packaging case with Australia in June 2018. Indonesia lost at the World Trade Organization in this case. Indonesia and other cigarette producing countries have contested the cigarette packaging policy implemented in Australia. Next, about the French perspective about international trade law will be explained by Juliet.
Yes. Actually, we're gonna talk about the similarities. Sorry. Aria, it's for you.
Okay, thank you. So the similarities between Indonesia and France, that Indonesia and France in international trade actors can either apply principles derived from international conventions ratified by their country. Second, France and Indonesia are part of the GATT General Agreement on Tariff and Trade membership that have now changed to WTO, World Trade Organization. Third, both countries also apply the UNIJOIT principles and the principles codified in the Incoterms.
Okay, so now the differences. One of the main differences between the two countries is that France is a European Union member, while Indonesia is a member of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. This means that these two countries are not submitted to the same principles. For example, the European Union includes the precautionary principle, which is not included in the World Trade Organization rules, as well as the free movement of labor principle, which is not included in the ASEAN rules. Moreover, the European Union is a supranational organization, while the ASEAN is an intergovernmental organization, meaning that France had to agree to give a part of its sovereignty in some areas, while Indonesia did not have to in order to join the ASEAN. In addition, international laws and treaties are not directly applicable in the domestic sphere in Indonesia. To have effect in this country, they must first be enacted in domestic law. In conclusion, France seems to be submitted more to international trade regulation than Indonesia.
Conclusion. First, most definition of general principles of international commercial law include international convention as a relevant source. Second, principles of international conventions can be difficult to enforce because of many exceptions. Ladies and gentlemen, as we know, international trade law provides various convenience for countries to conduct business. The international trade law aims to provide solutions for various cases related to problems arising in international trade. Dispute relation between different states can be difficult since there are many international trade rules. The last one, in our conclusion, we explain about general principles of law have been codified so that they could be used to resolve concrete case law. Thank you very much for your great attention, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening. May all those we have shared be beneficial for all of us. Thank you so much for your attention.
Okay, so thank you, Group 5. And we will move to Group 6, entitled Legal Analysis Pertaining to Barriers on International Trade Law in Indonesia and Vietnam. So to Group 6, please.
I will share the screen.
Okay, we can see your screen.
Okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, Dean of Law Faculty Serludi Sudirman and lecturer from UIB and UL. It's great to see you all. First, let me introduce myself and my partner. I am Muna Ulia from University International Batam, and my partner is Tran Sang Phuong Thao. She is from University Economic and Law Vietnam. In this opportunity, I would like to present about our article, Legal Analysis Pertaining to Barriers on International Trade Law, Indonesia and Vietnam. So, international trade law is the legal relationship that governs each country in conducting trade activities in the form of goods, service, intellectual property rights, and investment with the aim of meeting the needs of each country. International trade has an important role in the economy of every country. Through international trade, countries exchange goods to promote the advantage and overcome the limitation of their economies. In Indonesia, the 1945 Constitution of Republic Indonesia number 7 of 2014, Article 1, Chapter 1, number 3 on trade. Foreign trade is trade which includes export and import activities on goods or trade service that exceed the country's territorial boundaries. In Vietnam, is regulated in Clause 1, Article 3, Law on Foreign Trade Management 2017. That foreign trade activities are international goods trading activities carried out in the form of export and import, temporary import, foreign export, temporary export, foreign import, border transfer, transit, and other activities related to international goods sale and purchase activities in accordance with the provision of law and international treaties to which the Socialist Republic of Vietnam is a signatory. Vietnam and Indonesia have their own obstacles in undergoing international trade, and the legal system in both countries is civil law. Vietnam based on communist legal theory and French civil law, while Indonesia mixed it with Dutch law and Islamic law. So, on our article, we have two research questions. The first one is what barriers on international trade in Indonesia and Vietnam, and the second one is what are the similarities and the differences on trade barriers in these two countries. So, legal research methods and empirical legal research. Sorry, Pung Tao. About our research of article, actually legal research and methods are divided into two large groups, namely normative legal research methods and empirical legal research methods. However, in this article, we use normative legal research, which is based on written legislation and other literature. The data used in this article is secondary data, that is research data obtained through intermediary media or indirectly, such as books and articles related to international trade, as well as Indonesia and Vietnamese laws. So, next. So, what about international trade barriers and the legal analysis in Indonesia and Vietnam? On 1st January 1994, Indonesia officially became a member of the World Trade Organization, or known as WTO. Indonesia is one of the founding countries of the WTO. Law number 7 of 1994 on ratification of the agreement on stabilizing the World Trade Organization as evidence that Indonesia has validated the approval of the establishment of the WTO. Indonesia got some benefits during joining the WTO, such as protection from trade cheating, dumping, and discrimination policies. It can be concluded that the WTO is a means encouraged on orderly and fair trade in Indonesia, in the world. Law number 7 of 2014 regulates the law of international trade in Indonesia, which is a rule of law in the field of economic. According to Article 1, Chapter 1 of Law number 7 of 2014, number 22 on trade, international trade corporation is the government activity to fight for and secure the international interest through trade relations with other countries or international institution or organization. The first of the factors inhibiting international trade in Indonesia is the difference in the currency of each country. When a country conducts export activity, it will usually ask the importing country to pay using the currency of the exporting country, because the payment will certainly be related to the value of the money. Because if the change in capital and the amount of currency value of the exporting country is higher than the value of the currency of the importing country, it will increase the expenditure for the importing country. This will prevent the occurrence of an export and import in Indonesia. Actually, Indonesia has planned to use rupiah according to Article 21, Chapter 2 of Law number 7 of 2011 on currencies, that rupiah does not apply in international trade transaction. In the face of obstacles or challenge in undergoing international trade in terms of currencies is in conducting transactions, should both countries agree in using currencies such as using hard currency or US dollar currency. The next problem inhibiting international trade in Indonesia is the policy of countries such as, for example, in 1st January 2018, Vietnam issued a new policy, Prime Minister Decree number 116 of 2017, and Circular number 3 of 2018. One of the contents of the regulation is that cars from Indonesia entering Vietnam must first be tested for 300 kilometers. This policy has become an obstacle, especially countries that cooperate with Vietnam, such as Indonesia. Indonesia every year is able to export cars to Vietnam with very large number of about 30,000 until 40,000 units of cars. In Indonesia, there are prohibition and restriction on export and import. It states in Article 15, number 5, number 1, Law number 7 of 2014, namely, all goods can be exported or imported except those prohibited, restricted, or otherwise determined by law. As for any goods stipulated by the Minister as a prohibition for export is stipulated in the regulation of the Minister Trade of the Republic of Indonesia number 45 of 2019. Concerning goods prohibited from exporting, Article 2, Paragraph 3, namely goods in the field of agriculture, forestry, fisheries, and marine industry, mining goods listed in cities Appendix 1, and concerning cultural heritage goods. According to Article 5, exporters who violate the provision of Article 2, Paragraph 3 will be penalized in accordance with the provision of legislation. The provision or regulation of the country, each country has its own provision and regulation in regulating its trade with other countries. Of course, it has certain objectives such as to safeguard the economy against their country. In Indonesia, there are provisions and regulations on goods that are prohibited from export in described above. The provision of the text certainly has a purpose. The purpose of the ban on exporting goods is stated in the regulation of the Minister of Trade of the Republic of Indonesia number 45 of 2019, Article 2, Paragraph 1 on prohibited goods export. Namely, the Minister stipulates prohibited export goods on the grounds of to protect national security or public interest, including social, cultural, and moral society, to protect intellectual property rights, and to protect the healthy and safety of humans, animals, fish, plants, and environment. So the last obstacle is high taxes or import duties. Indonesia is part of member of FTA or Free Trade Association. In 2002, the Indonesia government ratified the establishment of a joint FTA with ASEAN countries. Indonesia participation in the FTA allows Indonesia to benefit from the implementation of free tariffs. For example, to reduce production costs so as to improve the competitiveness of the industry. In Law number 23 of 2013 concerning the state budget of fiscal year 2014, international trade tax is all state revenues derived from customs duties and taxes or levies on export. The structure of tax revenues is still dominated by tax revenues, especially domestic tax received from the non-oil and gas sector. If the duty of import duty is abolished, imported goods will easily control the Indonesian market. Domestic production activities will be treated with imported goods that enter without control. In addition, this can make the decline in domestic production, cause jobs to decrease, and cause the unemployment rate to increase. It can be concluded that the obstacles in terms of taxes or import duties actually benefit the economy in Indonesia. If there are more imports, the more taxes received by Indonesia, as well as if there is no import due to high import duties, then the public will be more profitable because the lack of income of outside goods will increase the buyer's desire for local goods. Okay, next my partner will explain about Paris on international trade law in Vietnam.
Okay, I will continue our presentation about Vietnam, international trade barriers and legal knowledge in Vietnam. As you know, trade barriers could be tariff or non-tariff. So Vietnam applies both types of trade barriers. The first one is tariff barriers. Vietnam was officially recognized as a member of WTO in 2006 and fulfilled the commitments about the tariff of the WTO. According to this, Vietnam reviews and revises regulations on import and export tax suitable with the commitment of the WTO. And Vietnam amended the law on import and export tax in 2016. So what I want to mention is that tariffs in Vietnam before and after joining the WTO are different. It is reduced, suitable with the free trade of the WTO. And secondly, Vietnam also applies a number of specific non-tariff barriers. The first one is import prohibitions. Vietnam prohibits some import products. It's regulated on Article 10 of the Law on Foreign Trade Management 2017. And next, Vietnam stipulates that some items must be licensed. This way helps manage imported goods and protect domestic production. And finally, Vietnam implemented the WTO Customs Valuation Agreement through the Custom Law 2006 and through related implementing regulations. In addition, the other issue can be mentioned is the field of foreign exchange management in Vietnam, which is regulated in the Foreign Exchange Ordinance. Yeah, and Vietnam's law does not recognize the use of foreign exchange by residents and non-residents to transact with each other recognition law. So this also have some limitations. And thus, Vietnam has applied these trade barriers with the aim of protecting the national interest in the process of global trade and economic integration. I only mentioned some typical barriers in Vietnam here. There are some other barriers, in fact. And yeah, now Mona will compare the similarities between two countries. Mona.
Yeah. Okay, so I will tell you guys about the similarity about international trade in Indonesia and Vietnam. Firstly, both countries are members of the WTO. They get a lot of benefits during joining the WTO, such as protection from trade, cheating, dumping, and discrimination policies. Secondly, are the export policies of their own countries and import policies from outside countries. This is quite a glitch for Indonesia and Vietnam. In Indonesia, there are provisions and regulations on goods that are prohibited from export as described above. The prohibition of the tax certainly has a purpose. The purpose of the ban on exporting goods is stated in the regulation of the Minister of Trade of the Republic of Indonesia number 45 of 2019, Article 2, Paragraph 1 on prohibited goods export, namely the minister stipulates prohibited export goods on the grounds of to protect national security or public interest, including school, social, cultural, and moral society, to protect intellectual property rights, and to protect the health and safety of humans, animals, fish, plants, and the environment. In Vietnam, currently prohibits the commercial importation of the following products: military equipment and facilities, narcotics, and each other. So in fact, in this obstacle, Vietnam and Indonesia actually aim to keep their country. So how about differences, Phuong Thao? You can explain that.
Yeah, about the differences about trade barriers in two countries. Although there are similarities in terms of barriers in international trade, there are still differences due to the different legal regulation in each country. So firstly, if the factor inhibits international trade in Indonesia are the tax rates. They may be the technical requirements that goods must be meeting in Vietnam. And secondly, the international trade barriers that they face and the measures they apply are different. So that Muna and me present before. And the last one is the terms of regulations of the country. Each country has particular rules and regulations. Indonesia consistently regulates trade, import and export activities in one set of laws. These activities in Vietnam is separately regulated by a specialized law and many other related laws such as Commercial Law 2005, the Law on Import and Export Tax in 2016, and with relevant documents such as the Constitution 2013, the Law on Investment, the Law on Tax Administrations, and Law on Customs, and so on, and many other degrees. So although there are differences in legal regulations, each country has quite specific and clear regulations consistent with the general provisions of international trade law. So about our conclusion, although there are many differences, both Vietnam and Indonesia follow the civil law system. So the provisions of the law in these countries also have many similarities. However, they still have different regulations on trade barriers to protect national interests and domestic enterprise. Yeah, and in addition, Vietnam and Indonesia join WTO and support free trade through the agreements with this organization that certainly reduce trade barriers. And with everything we mentioned, we think Vietnam and Indonesia will certainly have many cooperation opportunity in the future. Yeah, that's all from our group. Thank you for your listening.
Okay, thank you, Pong Tao and Mona. Thank you for the presentations. Next, we will listen to the presentations from Group 7 about reviewing history of international trade law in Indonesia and Vietnam. For Group 7, please.
Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Abigail, can you show the PowerPoint?
Okay, wait. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, Group 7 will represent the topic of history of international trade law in Vietnam and Indonesia, which represented by me, Phạm Nguyễn Tấn Trung, and Abigail Hosana Sirega. Next, please. So first of all, I will introduce briefly some information about Vietnam and Indonesia. Vietnam is a socialist country. In fact, there are 5 socialist countries now in the world, as China, Laos, Cuba, North Korea, and my country, Vietnam. So Vietnam now is one of a few of a socialist country existed in the world, and Indonesia is a republic country, which the head of state is a president of Indonesia. About geography, Vietnam and Indonesia are both the Southeast Asia countries. Vietnam is a country with long coastline country, and Indonesia is a country with many islands. About the language, Vietnam national language is Vietnamese. Also, the official language of Indonesia is Bahasa Indonesia or Indonesian. About and the population, Vietnam is the 15th most populous country in the world, with 97.3 million people in 2020, and Indonesia is the 4th most popular country in the world, also the most populous country in Southeast Asia, with 273.5 million people in 2020. So I will say about the legal system of both countries. Vietnam's legal system is a civil law system, which based on communist legal theory, because we are the socialist country, and also we was a colony of France. So we also, Vietnam's legal system also influenced by French civil law, and Indonesia's legal system is a civil law system, which mixed with Dutch law, because Indonesia was a colony of Dutch, and Islamic law, because Indonesia is a country which major population is Muslim. So the next slide, Ms. Abigail will move on. Please, Abigail. Abigail, can you hear me? Okay.
Okay, now I will explain about the research question So questions that come out in our mind when we make this article, first is what happened. Second one is what are the similarities and differences in the histories of international trade law between Vietnam and Indonesia. And next, research method. The method that we use in making our article is normative legal research. And to collect our data, we use secondary legal material, and it's a legal material that already provides an explanation such as legal papers, articles, and books.
Okay. So about the similarities in history of international in trade law in Indonesia and Vietnam. So Indonesia and Vietnam was other countries that have been colonized by European countries, which Vietnam was a colony of France and Indonesia was a colony of Dutch. So after our dependent, Vietnam and Indonesia both had a long time to reconstruct our economy, and we both aware that international trade is one of the important element to develop our country. So until now, Vietnam and Indonesia both are the members of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asia Nations, and we both are WTO members. So next, please. So about the differences in Vietnam during pre-colonial era, Vietnam almost closed with a negligible volume of foreign trade. Vietnam's economy had traditionally consisted of agrarian and production and small-scale handicraft industries. And by becoming ASEAN's member in 1995 and WTO's member in 2007, Vietnam's economic integration was later than Indonesia's because of the long time with many wars in Vietnam during 20th century. However, Vietnam was very proactive in finding economic partners around the world. The clearest evidence is EVFTA, the FTA signed between Vietnam and the European Union. With this FTA, Vietnam becomes the second member of ASEAN signing FTA with European Union. Furthermore, Vietnam also signed many FTA on behalf of themselves with other developed countries like Japan, South Korea, and the UK. About Indonesia, because of geographic location and natural resources, Indonesia had the history of international trade with foreign merchants as Indians, Chinese, Arabs, eventually Europeans. After being an independent country from Dutch in 1945, Indonesia was one of the earliest countries joined GATT, which replaced by WTO in 1995 and was the co-founders of ASEAN. However, the economy of Indonesia has some difficult periods because of some political and economic crisis. Most of FTAs, which Indonesia signed on behalf of ASEAN's member, as a country with a major population is a Muslim, Indonesia is also a member of trade preferential system of the Organization of the Islamic Conference, which is a multilateral economic and commercial cooperation forum in the Islamic world. So the conclusion, Ms. Abigail will move on, please.
So the conclusion from our article is Indonesia and Vietnam are starting from countries that are equally less developed international trade and becomes larger and includes foreign countries more widely. Indonesia was colonized by the Dutch and Vietnam by the French. the more buyers from outside the country would trust Indonesia and Vietnam to buy what they need is very helpful in terms of foreign exchange and currently human welfare with rules on international trade that are more directed, not harm and discriminate any country in the country. And to get the rules, what Indonesia and Vietnam can feel after several years and after passing through the colonial our presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for group 7, for Miguel and Trung. And the next presentations, let's listen to group 8 about the engagement of Indonesia and Vietnam in the World Trade Organization, or WTO. From group 8, please.
Thank you, Ms. Teresias. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your participation today. Let me introduce myself first. I'm Ngọc Jin from University of Economics and Law, and my partner is Abigail Natalia Phuket from Universitat International Batam. I'm so sorry that today my partner sister had an accident, so that she couldn't take part in our presentation. What I would like to present to you today is the compliances of Indonesia and Vietnam to the WTO commitment. The process of becoming an original member or acceding to World Trade Organizations is inherently unfair. A country which wants to become a member not only must comply with on WTO general principle as well as commitments when joining the WTO, but each member country is also allowed to require the applicant country to have more concession called WTO Plus in return for supporting the country applying for accession. Without the support for of key WTO member, no acceding country could have been ratified. And consequently, the country applying for accession accept the conditions set by developed countries, including rapid opening to international investors to enter the service and manufacturing sector, removal of import barriers, even sell agricultural products at domestic prices. Following the upward trend of the global economic integration, Indonesia became one of the WTO founding members in 1995, and Vietnam acceding as an applicant country later in the year of 2007. This presentation will demonstrate that the accession commitment of Vietnam in Indonesia are no exception to that trend, and as well as the similarity and differences in the compliances of Indonesia and Vietnam to the WTO commitment. So first, I will give you the brief profile and legal system of each state. About the legal system in Indonesia. The legal system in Indonesia adheres to the legal system of the European continental and or civil law. It can be viewed of history. I'm sorry. It can be viewed of history and politics, law, sources of law, and the system of law enforcement, where such a system is widely growing in the European countries such as Netherlands, France, Italy, Germany, then in Latin America and Asia. In Asia, Indonesia during the Dutch colonial period on the legal system of continental Europe has the following characteristic. The first one is derived from the codification of law applicable in the Roman Empire during region of Emperor Justinian. The main principles that the law obtained the binding force because of the regulations of the form of legislation and systematically arranged in the codification. The judge's decision does not bind the public, but only bind the parties who are in the court. And the source of law is the main law established by a legislative body. At first, the law are classified into two, namely public law, constitution law, administrative law, criminal law, and private law, civil law, and commercial law. Next, I will move to reprofile in the legal system in Vietnam. Since Vietnam independence on September 30, 1945, the country has developed a social legal system based on the civil law system with some major modification from Marxist-Leninist ideology. The current legal system of Vietnam has the following characteristics. The first one is legislation is the most important source of law. The second one is courts as subordinate to the legislature and must make decisions based on legislation. The third one is policies set out by the Communist Party, the only political party in Vietnam, which can lead to changes in the legislation in future. As you can see on the screen, is the hierarchy of legal documents, legal validity in Vietnam. Our research question, the first one is how have Indonesia and Vietnam enacted domestic and foreign policies and national legislation to follow the WTO commitments. And the last one is what are the similarities and differences in the compliances of Indonesia and Vietnam to the WTO commitment. About the research of method, the research method is a method of writing which is connected with the preparation of this review our journal, the order using a normative legal research. Method of data collection is done by method of writing literature library research derived from a study of the laws and regulation books and the result of other research that there is a relation with the problem that exists. And data analysis methods is comparative approach. About our discussion part in the article, the first thing is similarity. The similarity between the compliances of Indonesia and Vietnam to the WTO commitment is permitted import and export of products such as non-oil oil, processed oil or raw oil and gas. The second one is when acceding to WTO or free trade agreement on threatened with serious injury to domestic producer. The next one is to stay used to apply safeguard measures to protect their domestic market. And the last one is transparency. Transparency means the treatment and policy implemented by a state should be transparent and can be aware of its trading partner. Next, I will move on the differences between the engagement of Indonesia and Vietnam in WTO. The first one is the accession to World Trade Organization of Indonesia and Vietnam. Indonesia and Vietnam joined the WTO in 1995 and 2007, respectively. Therefore, Indonesia was one of the founding members, and Vietnam acceded to WTO as an applicant country later. This difference comes mainly from the fact that since 24 February 1950, Indonesia was a GATT member, and the socialistic market economy of Vietnam just began in 1986. And the World Trade Organization launched on the 1st of January 1995, but it's half a century older. Since 1948, the system rules have been established in the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, called briefly GATT. As you can see, accessions to GATT in advance either reminds for Indonesia to be an established member of the WTO under several favorable conditions. Meanwhile, after independence and reunification in 1975, Vietnam managed the economy with a centralized lending mechanism until 1986, when Vietnam launched an economic reform called Đổi mới, an open door process in reform with the Communist Party and government policy, which is one of Vietnam's major goals of converging from a lending economy to a market economy based on socialism and integrating itself into the global economy. This event is a hub for the development of Vietnam in an aspect and start the search for international free trade opportunity in order to take advantage of the internal power of the country and integrate into the global economy. As a result, on the 1st of January 1995, Vietnam put forward its request for WTO membership, and on the 11th of January 2007, Vietnam was recognized as the 150 member of WTO. The second difference we can consider is the application of safeguard measures in international trade. Safeguard measures are truly legitimate trade obstacle to either fair trade or unfair competition. Custom regulations are integral, which government based on together import-export responsibility and regulate trade sector. In Vietnam legal system based on Article 91 of the Law on Foreign Trade Management, safeguard measures include application of safeguard tax, import quotas, application of tariff quotas, excusing import license, and other safeguards. From my group perspective, the provisions of Bond D are not consistent with the provisions of the WTO and the trade agreement to which Vietnam is a member. Specifically, according to WTO, the principle of transparency requires countries to be open and transparent about all kinds of procedure, policies, and regulations so that member countries know clearly and specifically to eliminate ambiguity, regulation, and procedure. The fact that Bondi provide for all the safeguard measures without knowing what those measures are inconsistent with the requirement of the transparency principle. This is contrary to the core objective of the WTO. In comparison, in Indonesia law system, applicable safeguard measure as noted as applying safeguard tax, apply import quotas, application of tariff quotas issuing import license. However, in practice, applying tariff quotas under WTO market access commitment, Indonesia has had tariff quota commitment since 1995, which have not been applied so far because of a seemingly more liberal regime in place. For example, apply rate lower than in quota rates and quota-free import. The next one is signing free trade agreement of Indonesia and Vietnam at present. Up to present, Vietnam has signed 14 FTAs and implemented with validation. One FTA is signed and coming into effect, and 2 FTAs are being settled. About Indonesia, they have 15 FTA signed and implemented with validation, and 14 FTAs are signed and coming into effect until FTAs are being settled. The fifth differences we can see is that Indonesia top open new ways to complete negotiation with upholding the principle of the single undertaking and prioritize development for developing countries and least developing countries. As opposed to that trend, since the year of WTO accession, Vietnam, one of Asia's prominent economies, tracing to regionalization and globalization, has predominantly concentrated primarily on its WTO accession and later on concluding PTAs with the EU and the United States, which are Vietnam's most vital market for exportation, rather than giving priority to the integration of Asia. Based on the discussion, it is concluded that Indonesia and Vietnam have been not only facing many challenges, but also receiving plenty of opportunity thanks to each other engagement in WTO. Under some circumstances, the literature support the connection between accession to the WTO and growth, the main one being that there is evidence that positive effect often depend on the depth of the commitment of a country itself. In the comparison between Indonesia and Vietnam's compliances with the WTO commitment, it can be seen clearly that the similarity consists of their enacted policies and regulations such as a wide range of permitted import and export goods, the application of safeguard measures, reducing tariff without tariff, regulating food safety, livestock health, and food crop. On the other hand, there are a number of distinct characteristics, like the accession process to World Trade Organization, the application of specific safeguard measures in international trade to protect their domestic economy, FTA side, GSP, the right or target to develop national economy after acceding to WTO. Overall, the commitment in WTO policy regulation of Indonesia is better for countries being a republic with a residential system, and that of Vietnam would be more appropriate and practical to be implemented in a socialist country. This is the end of our group presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Chin, for the presentation. And finally, we will come to the last group with group 9. They will present about the evolution of the Chinese and European Union on the regional trade agreement. So for group 9.
Yeah. Good morning, everybody. We will start. So yes, Pauline will share the presentation.
Sorry.
It's coming.
I'm trying, but
Sorry for the convenience. T'arrives pas tu veux que je fasse?
I'm trying. Yeah, please. Ouais, s'il te plaît.
Ok. Alors, tac. Alors, tac. Sorry. Tac. Ok.
Tu arrives?
Ouais, attends, je suis en train de voir ça. Ok.
C'est bon, j'ai réussi. Je crois. Non.
Ok.
Non.
Attends. Je crois que tu vois là, non? Non. Je crois que c'est bon, t'as le... Excuse me, do you see the screen?
Yes, already.
Yes? Okay, sorry, okay. Okay, okay. Okay, so excuse me for convenience. So we will talk about with Pauline about the regional trade agreements in European Union and in China. So first we will introduce ourselves. So my name is Bruno. I come from France and I am an exchange student in UAL. And Pauline is also French and she is also a student of UAL. So because we are both from France, we decided to focus not only on the French law, which can be boring, but we decided to focus on the trade law, on the international trade law, and more precisely in the World Trade Organization law. So that's why we decided to focus our presentation on the regional trade agreements in European Union and China. So we will try to do it shortly, briefly, in only 15 minutes. Okay, so first I will explain you what is a regional trade agreement. So it's defined in the WTO as a reciprocal preferential trade agreements between two or more partners, which have allowed countries to negotiate rules and commitments that go beyond what was possible multilaterally. So it's a definition, and the regional trade agreements cover more than half of international trade today. So it's an important topic today, and it's operating alongside global multilateral agreements under the WTO. And in recent years, many countries have actively sought to establish new and often more modern and progressive bilateral and regional trade agreements that aim to increase trade and boost economic growth. So now regional trade agreements are really has a huge importance on the trade, international trade. Okay, so more precisely in this presentation, we will only focus on the FTA, so the free trade agreements, which are part of the regional trade agreements. So first, I will introduce you China, the country of China. So it's the world's most populous country with a population of more than 1.4 billion, and China borders 14 countries. It's the second most of any countries in the world after Russia. And it's a country which covers an area of 9.6 million square kilometers. So it is the third or fourth largest country. So it's a very huge country by its size, but moreover by its economical importance. So I will let Pauline explain European Union.
The European Union is a political and economic union of 27 member states. They are located primarily in Europe. An internal single market has been established through a standardized system of laws that apply in all member states. The EU policies aim to ensure the free movement of people, goods, services, and capital within the internal market, enact legislation in justice and home affairs, and maintain common policies on trade. The European Union is one of the main promoters of free trade agreements, FTAs. This position is not new since 2000, and even more so in the decade now ending, the Commission, supported by the Council and the European Parliament, has constantly sought to negotiate and conclude new trade agreements, a figure that is expected to increase significantly following the entry into force of the agreement with Vietnam, and to rise in the coming years to more than 40% if the agreement
Pauline, I think, do you hear us?
I think Pauline lost.
Maybe we lost Pauline. Okay, don't worry, she will come back soon. Don't worry, I will continue. So Pauline, can you go to the next slide, please? We lost Pauline, and I cannot. Okay, don't worry, I will do it myself. I will just ask her what happened. Okay, so I will continue. I think she will come back soon. So I will share my screen. Okay. Okay, do you see it?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, perfect. Oops, sorry. Okay, it's perfect. Okay, so now I will speak about the legal system of the World Trade Organization, who is very important to understand how works the regional trade agreements. So first, it's very important to understand that the agreements of the WTO, the fundamental agreement, it's the GATT, who was signed in 1938. As Chin just said before, Indonesia and Vietnam are taking part of this organization. So the WTO organized international trade with the principle of non-discrimination. We can see it on the presentation. So it's just here. It's the fact that first, a country cannot so this article, so it's Article 1 of the GATT, it stipulates that the member shall not discriminate between like products from different trading partners. This is the most favorite nation, which is explained in the GATT Article 1. And also a member shall not discriminate between its own and like foreign products. This is the national treatment. It's here. So this is the two very important principle of the GATE that say that a country cannot discriminate other country. Okay, so in this context, when a WTO member enter into a national integration arrangement, it departs from the guiding principle of non-discrimination defined in Article 1 of GITT and also of the Article 2 of the JTS if it's a service agreement. Okay, but there is one exception to this principle, three exceptions of this principle, and it's what we talk about in our article with Pauline. It's so there is three specific conditions, and the most important one, the one we will explain, it's the fact that how to explain it? It's the fact that a country can decide to create custom union and free trade areas covering trade in goods. So this it's paragraphs 4 to 10 of Article 24 of GATE. So this is the point that permitted country to enter into an arrangement under specific conditions, which are spelled out in three sets of rules. So the first one is this one. So we will not focus on the other one because it's not about our article, but the other one are the enabling clause, which refers to preferential trade arrangement in trade in goods between developing country members. And the third one, it's about the Article 5 of GITS, which governs the conclusion of RTAs in the area of trade in services for both developed and developing countries. But here we will only focus in this presentation and in our article about the regional trade agreements, which are part of the GATE, Article 24 and Article 5 for the services. So I think you understand well. Pauline, did you come back? Did you come back?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, next. So we will go on the next slide.
Okay, so during this presentation, our objectives are to identify all the free trade agreements concluded by China and the European Union. We will also examine deeply the characteristics of these agreements, their dates of entry for those which are already in force, their conditions of entry into force, the area of the agreement, determine what the agreement covers, whether it covers goods or services. In some cases, free trade agreements are negotiated for a fixed period, so their effects are temporary. We will see which agreements are affected by this specificity. Finally, we will examine the effects of these agreements. For some of the agreements, it is possible to compare the theoretical objectives with those which are in practice. Some of the agreements reached by China or European Union are more effective than others. Many free trade agreements face criticism that challenges them. So now I'm going to talk about the research methods. Thank you. So first, we read the government reports to find out exactly what the free trade agreements of China and European Union are. The difficulty during this first stage was to clearly differentiate these agreements from other forms of trade agreements. The second difficulty was to succeed in determining those which are effectively enforced and those which are in negotiation are then abandoned. We then used the public bookstores to learn more about these agreements, and as they were the main source of information in this research. Law and business journals allows us to get criticism of these agreements, of the impact they are in practice. Finally, we use interviews to refine our research and better understand the value of this agreement overall. And so now we're going to talk about differences and similarities between both countries.
Okay, so thank you, Pauline. So in our article, we decided to identify and explain like around 15 trade agreements, free trade agreements, which can be very long to do it now. So we have decided to focus only in a few trade agreements. So if we decided to start by focus on the similarities, for example, South Korea, China, both China and European Union have free trade agreement with this country. So first we will try to explain shortly those free trade agreements. So the first one about China, this free trade agreement was signed in 2015, and it entered in force in the same year. And it's a really deep, huge agreement because it has the objective of eliminate the custom duties in about 90% of products. So it's huge, and it will eliminate it over 20 years. So we think that this free trade agreement will impact about 73 million of dollars. So it's a huge agreement, and the agreement also covers the services, investment, e-commerce, competition, public procurement, and environment sectors. It's a really big agreement, and I will let Pauline present the agreement between South Korea and European Union.
So European Union has also an agreement with South Korea. This free trade agreement between European Union and South Korea is a treaty that entered in force on July 1st of 2011. After several years of negotiations, it is the first trade treaty established between the European Union and Asian country. The FTA was designed to increase trade between the EU and South Korea by removing about almost 98% of custom taxes between the two zones, excluding a few products like rice, which are not included in the treaty. An annual trade committee at ministerial level plays a supervisory role and is designed to ensure that the agreement operates properly. So now we're going to talk about the difference. And as an example, we took the most important agreements of European Union and China. So
I will start to speak about the regional comprehensive partnership with an agreement which China is part of, and so it's one of I think it's the largest free trade area in the world because 15 countries signed this agreement. The agreement is signed by all the countries, but is not yet entering into force. As we think it will enter into force in 1 or 2 years. It will depend of the conditions of all the countries. So this agreement will eliminate around 90% of the custom duties from each country, and as well as tariff and non-tariff barriers without any major sectoral exclusion. So it will impact all the goods and services. And it's a huge agreement with about around 20 chapters, 17 annexes, and 54 lists of commitments. So yes, so once the agreement will enter into force, on the first year, 65% of the custom duties will be eliminated, and the next 25% will be phased over a period of time of 20 years. So 65 on the first year and 25% over a period of time of only 20 years. So yes, and this agreement also provides some facilities for investment on intellectual property. But unfortunately, this agreement does not provide for any social or environmental standards, and also not nor any restriction for state enterprise. So I will let now Pauline explain the Mercosur and European Union agreement.
So the EU Mercosur agreement is a free trade agreement between those two unions. It's a draft free trade agreement under negotiation since 2000. The negotiations were suspended in 2004 and resumed in May 2013. Although an agreement in principle was reached on June 28th of 2019, the final texts were neither finalized nor voted nor ratified, and therefore did not enter into force. If ratified, this agreement would constitute the largest trade agreement concluded by the European Union in terms of number of citizens concerned. The trade agreement is part of a more general association agreement between the two blocs currently under negotiation. However, the FTA is already heavily contested, mainly due to the environmental and climate concerns. Environmental and agricultural civil society organizations are rallying against the agreement, while national and regional parliaments in Ireland, Austria, and Belgium have already adopted resolutions rejecting the agreement. In addition, the recent resolution of the European Parliament specifies that the EU-Mercosur agreement cannot be ratified as it is, a position that France is also propagating. So now we're going to present another similarity between European Union and China in free trade agreements.
Yeah, I think we are a little bit late, so because we started 10 minutes ago, so maybe we will just speak about the similarities. So this one, Singapore, and not about because I think we are late. I'm sorry because it's 10 minutes. So okay, so I will speak about the agreement between China and Singapore. So it's an agreement which was signed in October 2008, and which took effect on January 2009. And so Singapore was already part of a free trade agreement with China through the China-ASEAN agreement. The China-ASEAN agreement is explained in our article. So Singapore and China wanted to have an agreement which is bigger than the agreement between China and ASEAN. So they decided to create their own agreement, who were necessary for Singapore, which has China as its main trading partner. So this agreement aims to eliminate 95% of Chinese custom duties on Singapore exports. And conversely, it will remove all Singaporean customs duties on Chinese products. So this agreement is fully applied since 5 years. So those two countries can enjoy the fact that now they nearly eliminate all the custom duties between them. So I will let now Pauline explain the agreement between Singapore and European Union.
So the EU-Singapore Trade Agreement was signed in 19 October of 2018. The European Parliament gave its consent to the agreement on the 13th February of 2019. The agreement significantly reduces custom duties between the two groups, partly immediately after its ratification, then gradually over 5 years. The agreement also allows European production standards to be extended to Singapore in sectors such as automobiles. The agreement replaces a multitude of agreements between Singapore and the member states of the European Union. It allows the recognition of 138 European protected geographical indications. Under the trade agreement, Singapore will remove all remaining tariffs on EU products and will commit to keep unchanged the current duty-free access for all the EU products. The agreement also provides new opportunities for EU services providers, among other in sectors such as telecommunication, environmental services, engineering, computing, and maritime transport. So now we're going to conclude.
Okay. Okay, so we are late, so we go directly to the conclusion. So to conclude, we can, in recent years, many countries like China and European Union organization have actively sought to establish new and offer on very progressive and large and deep agreements, bilateral and regional trade agreements that aim to increase trade and boost economic growth. So we can see, I hope you understand it here. We just saw that China and European Union has a very large, big importance in the regional trade agreements, and more precisely in the free trade agreements. China is the first country in the world in terms of free trade agreements. In our article, we describe around 10 free trade agreements of China, and China is solidifying its position in Asia. China has a huge position in Asia that the European Union does not have, but the European Union try to be bigger in this area. For example, European Union signed an agreement with Vietnam, which is described in our article with Pauline. So yes, so we can to compare European Union with China. European Union has only 4 free trade agreements, but they try to be tougher, to be larger in Asia. So yes, thank you to our listeners for
listening.
Okay, thank you, Pauline and Bruno, for the presentations. Okay, now I would like to invite maybe for Miss Rina and also Miss Rina first to give a brief comments for the presentations, please.
Okay, thank you very much, Ibu Theodosia. Well, I would like to congratulate to all of you, the students from University of Economic and Law, Vietnam, and Universitas International Batam. I really appreciate your presentation, and I'm really happy to see your development after 3 meetings with me in legal methods, and then how to draft legal writings, and also when I review your papers. Okay, and I believe that if you put all your opinions, all your arguments, and also case law into the articles, I think you will be saved by the editors of the publications journals, because some of the editors is actually are here in this webinar. They try to follow what's your arguments, and then I think they're quite happy with all of the presentations. And some of the, it's not really a critiques I'm going to tell you, but I would like to just give comment, and please add it to your articles, because this is legal articles. Please don't forget to put the case law, because if only the legislation you put, and then we need some of examples. I'm happy to hear some of the examples presented by the students, but some of the students also didn't give a bit of introduction of the case law. So in that article, I hope that I can read more case law. 2 case laws or 3 case laws would be sufficient for the journals publications. Okay, and this is because I don't have to talk a lot because I'm going to read the whole articles of yours. Okay, and again, I would like to say thank you for all of the students. You are remarkable, amazing, and I'm really happy to hear your presentations because you cover everything. In addition to the case law, of course, if it's case law, it will consume a lot of time if you discuss it. But again, thank you very much. And then I hope to read the complete set of your article. Okay, the complete set of your articles, meaning it's from the abstract until the references, because I need to, I think by the end of this month, I'm going to submit it to the journals. There are 9 journals that we are going to submit each articles, and inshallah, they're going to publish it within this year, or probably if it's the latest is next year's in April. Okay, thank you again. Back to you, Ibu Theodesi. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Rina. Yes, I agree that the students already presented very well. Yeah, okay. Maybe for other UIB lectures, Mr. Dafiq, do you want to say something?
Before I start, I need to ask Ms. Theodosia with how much time I got in my hands.
Maybe around 3 minutes maximum.
Okay. I've written some review regarding the substance, and I believe under the supervision of Ms. Rina, the paper is going to be great, but several substance that I need to emphasize. Maybe not all of you. I've written all 9 comments. Maybe I'll just emphasize 1 or 2 comments that is quite a substantial in value for me to discuss. For the first group, Cindy and Quentin, I believe you're talking about you're talking about legislation, the legal framework, and I need to emphasize what Ms. Burina said, that we need a case law, because case law is, as we know, case law is progressing with the society and it's evolving, and while the legislation is mainly static and it's not going to change or amend itself without the initiative of our legislative part. But in terms of I realized that you use the term jurisprudence in Indonesia to signify jurisprudency. I think jurisprudence is English, is legal theory, and maybe you'll need to change that, because if you're talking about jurisprudency in Indonesia, it means case law actually, and you need to emphasize that. For group 2, Lala and Alexander, the Panama part was great. It is very substantial in nature, but maybe you can emphasize more, analysis more regarding the law pertaining to international trade. Because it is an international legal, I believe, seminar, and there needs to be some legal part. For group 3, Kevin and Aurel, I don't have comments for you. Sorry, great. For group 4, Angel and Eric, despite the difficulties, we're talking about Taiwan, but your conclusion must be two-sided. We're not just talking about Taiwan. Taiwan have difficulties regarding its policy. The one China policy, it's quite a remarkable challenge, but conclusion must also uncover all of your research topic, and also it must not be just one-sided. Sorry, Mr. Odos, I'm going to fly this over. For group 5, Ria and Juliet, if I'm not mistaken, the discussion is great, but bear in mind that all objectives must be achieved fully and in your paper later, And for group 6, Muna and Pong, difference. And I emphasize the difference in currency as the difficulty or challenges in yeah, we are talking about international trade. Differences in currency will be a great challenge, but why? You need to emphasize more about the exchange rate, whether it affects the international trade or not, because we are already talking about international trade. There is going to be a difference in currency. Whether the difference in currency is very volatile or the reputability of a certain currency. Let's say in Indonesia, we accept rupiah, but how about trading with another state? Yeah, and also maybe transfer pricing or translation costs. Yeah, I believe I heard some elaboration about translation cost. It's just you must emphasize more on that. For Group 7, Abigail and Trung, more elaboration on the historical law. Yep, making the shapes. Yeah, and how the historical part is making the shapes of countries in lawmaking, international lawmaking, actually. Yeah, because that is the point of your topic of your paper, and I believe it will emphasize upend your paper even more. For Group 8, Abigail and I have some words bad writing here. I cannot. Okay, Group 8, yeah. The topic is interesting. The topic is we're talking about the compliances to WTO commitments, but still, yeah, the paper must address the question whether Indonesia or Vietnam has complied to the WTO commitments. And for Group 9, Pauline and Bruno, Group 9 is actually unique because it is purely done by students from France, and yeah, we see a little more diversity in the research method, but the topic is about EU and China, and when we are talking about EU and China, they are all big players in international trade, and maybe it's because the amount of time given is not sufficient for you, but I'll be more happy and grateful if your background you elaborate more why you choose EU and why China. At the end of the day, your conclusion already signify the significance and gravity of why you elaborate more in order to how do I say to make the readers interested in your in reading your paper. And then we're talking about you examine deeply about the date of entry into the force of an agreement, the condition of entry into force, the area of agreement. It is highly descriptive in nature. I believe with thorough legal examination and digging of resources, you'll be able to find the answers. But the fourth one is very challenging. The agreement effect of the agreement. You need to have a rigorous, more rigorous, ambitious study to answer this question. And if you did it, it will be a great paper. Okay, I think that's all, Ms. Theodolesia. I'll return it to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. David, for the very comprehensive comments. Maybe if you want to give detail, you can give it to me, and then I will give to the students. Also for Ms. Lina as well, for each group. Okay, so it's already 20 past 5 p.m. So to officially close the seminar, so let's open your camera, turn on your camera, and then we will have a photo session together. Also with the comments from Ms. Dung and also Dr. Cook, so they will give it to you maybe by email, because Dr. Cook has another meeting. Okay, so I will count 1, 2, 3. Smile. Okay, once more, and yeah, free pose. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Okay, so congratulations. So this is the end of the program, but for the students, I still need your suggestions and feedback. So I will send to you. I mean, like, I would like you to fill in the questionnaire. I will send it via WhatsApp group. Okay. So congratulations. Thank you very much for the togetherness that we have, although it's a virtual program. And I'm so happy and so glad that you can join this program. And I hope that maybe I can see you sometimes after the pandemic. Okay, thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Stay safe, stay healthy.
You too, stay healthy. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Stay healthy.